She wore an iron collar for 7 years, invisible to everyone who mattered, until the day they told her she'd been sold. Not to a stranger, to the warrior who murdered her brother. The man who destroyed everything she loved was coming to claim her as his bride, and she had 5 days to decide between a wedding that would kill her slowly or an escape that would kill her fast. But then someone saw her, really saw her. A gentle soul in a brutal world who whispered 3 impossible words in the darkness. I'll help you. What he offered wasn't safety, it was a choice. And choices, for people like her, were more dangerous than any weapon. Because choosing meant hoping, and hope in a world built on cruelty was the most terrifying risk of all. The black sails appeared on the horizon one day too early. The plan shattered, the trap closed, and she realized that surviving the escape was only the beginning, because men like him never forget, never forgive, and never ever stop hunting what they believe they own. The iron collar felt heavier that morning. Astrid's fingers traced the cold metal around her neck, a habit she'd developed over 7 winters of wearing it. The weight never changed, but some days it pressed harder against her throat, making each breath a conscious effort. Today was one of those days. She stood at the edge of Jarl Haldor's longhouse, watching the fjord stretch endlessly toward a horizon she would never reach, and felt the collar tighten like a living thing, trying to swallow her whole. You'll wear blue for the ceremony. The voice behind her was flat, businesslike. Astrid didn't turn. She knew Haldor's wife, Gudrun, stood there with fabric draped over her arms, the kind of fine wool that thralls like Astrid would never touch except to wash or mend. The color brings out your eyes. Bjorn's messengers said he prefers light eyes in a woman. The words hit like fists. Astrid's stomach twisted, bile rising sharp and acidic in her throat. Her hands gripped the wooden doorframe so hard splinters bit into her palms. She welcomed the pain. It was real. It was hers, unlike everything else. I am not cattle to be presented, Astrid said, her voice barely above a whisper. The morning cold made her breath visible, small clouds of defiance that disappeared almost as quickly as they formed. Gudrun's laugh was short and sharp as a blade. No, you're less than cattle. Cattle have value beyond a single transaction. You are a gift, a pretty thing to woo. Wrap and send across the water to prevent bloodshed. Be grateful, girl. Most thralls never serve a purpose this important. Important. The word echoed in Astrid's skull like a death knell. 3 days ago, she'd been invisible, just another pair of hands to card wool and haul water. 3 days ago, she'd had no name that mattered, no face that anyone truly saw. Then, Bjorn Ironhand's longship had appeared on the fjord, black sails cutting through morning mist like a blade through flesh, and suddenly Astrid had become the most visible person in the entire settlement. She was 19 winters old. She'd been 12 when the raiders came to her village, when she'd watched her father fall with an axe in his chest and her mother dragged screaming onto a ship that sailed away and never returned. Astrid had been the lucky one, they said. Jarl Haldor had claimed her himself, brought her to his household, never touched her the way some jarls touched their thralls. Lucky. That's what they called 7 years of serving people who owned her like they owned their cooking pots and hunting dogs. The ceremony is in 5 days, Gudrun continued, her voice growing distant as she moved back into the longhouse. Haldor expects you clean and prepared. If you shame him before Bjorn's clan, you'll wish you'd died in whatever pathetic village spawned you. The threat lingered in the cold air long after Gudrun's footsteps faded. Astrid's legs finally gave out. She sank against the doorframe, knees hitting frozen earth hard enough to bruise. Her breath came in short, desperate gasps that hurt her chest. 5 days, 120 hours, 7,200 heartbeats until she became property transferred, a signature on a peace treaty written in her flesh. She pressed her forehead against the rough wood and tried to remember her brother's face. Einar. He'd been 14 when the raiders came, already broad-shouldered and strong from helping their father with the fishing nets. He'd tried to fight. Astrid had seen the massive warrior cut him down with almost casual efficiency, a man so large he'd seemed inhuman, his beard thick and dark, his eyes empty of anything resembling mercy. 7 years, and she could still hear the wet sound of the blade entering Einar's chest, could still see the surprise on her brother's young face, the way his hands had reached for her even as he fell, could still feel her own scream tearing her throat raw. "You're up early." The new voice was soft, careful, completely different from Gudrun's harsh tones. Astrid looked up to find Leif standing a few paces away, his thin frame wrapped in a gray cloak against the morning chill. Jarl Haldor's youngest son. The disappointment. The boy who preferred poems to axes, who stood at the Thing assemblies and watched rather than spoke, who the other warriors mocked for his gentle hands and careful words. He held a wooden cup, steam rising from whatever warm liquid it contained. His eyes, gray as winter storms, held something Astrid had learned not to trust in this place: concern, kindness, things that made the iron collar feel even heavier because they reminded her she was human underneath it. "They told you," Leif said, not a question. He moved closer, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. About Bjorn, about the marriage. Marriage. Such a soft word for what was really happening. Astrid's laugh came out broken, painful. "Is that what we're calling it? Marriage implies choice, implies two people coming together willingly. This is transaction. This is your father trading me like a barrel of salted fish to avoid a war he's too weak to win." She expected anger, expected him to remind her of her place, to strike her for speaking about his father that way. Instead, Leif's jaw tightened and he looked away, toward the same horizon Astrid had been staring at moments before. "You're right," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry, for what that's worth from someone like me." Someone like me. The words hung strange in the air. What did Leif have to apologize for? He was free. He could walk away from the settlement, sail to Iceland or Dublin or any of the other places Astrid had heard the warriors talk about during their mead-soaked evenings. He could choose. But when Astrid looked at his face, really looked, she saw something unexpected. Pain. The same trapped expression she saw in her own reflection when she caught glimpses of herself in still water. Different. Cage perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. 5 days, Astrid whispered. Her hands were shaking now, tremors running through her entire body. 5 days, and I belong to a man I've never met. They say Bjorn Ironhand killed 17 men in the last raid season. They say he laughs when he fights. They say he prefers his women quiet and his ale strong and his enemies suffering. They say a lot of things. Leif crouched down beside her, finally close enough that she could smell wool and wood smoke on his clothes. Most of it is boasting. Warriors exaggerate to build reputation. And if they're not exaggerating? The question sat between them like a living thing. Leif had no answer. They both knew it. After a long moment, he held out the cup he'd been carrying. "It's warm mead with honey. You're shaking." Astrid stared at the offering. Thralls didn't drink mead. Thralls got water and weak beer and sometimes broth if they were fortunate. This was another small kindness that hurt worse than cruelty because it reminded her of everything she'd lost, everything she would never have again. Her fingers closed around the warm wood anyway. The heat seeped into her frozen hands, and she lifted the cup to her lips. The sweet, spiced liquid burned down her throat, pooling warm in her empty stomach. For just a moment, she felt almost human. "Thank you," she managed. Leif nodded. He didn't move away, and Astrid found herself grateful for the presence of another person who seemed to see her as more than a useful object. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, revealing the harsh beauty of the fjord and the mountains beyond. 5 days of freedom left, 120 hours of being Astrid before she became simply Bjorn's wife, Bjorn's property, Bjorn's problem to manage. Somewhere in the longhouse behind them, Gudrun's voice rose sharp, calling for the thralls to begin morning tasks. The settlement was waking. The day stretched ahead, and somewhere across the dark water, a man named Bjorn Ironhand was preparing to sail here and claim his prize. The iron collar pressed against Astrid's throat, heavy as fate, cold as the grave she should have found 7 winters ago beside her father and brother. She finished the mead, handed the empty cup back to Leif, and forced herself to stand. Her legs felt unsteady, but held. They would have to hold for 5 more days. After that, it wouldn't matter anymore what she felt or wanted or feared. "Will you be there?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself with the question. "At the ceremony?" Leif looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. "Yes," he said finally. "I'll be there." She didn't know why that mattered, but somehow it did. Astrid nodded once, then turned toward the longhouse and the day's endless work that awaited. Behind her, she felt Leif's gaze following, gentle as a hand she wasn't allowed to hold, warm as freedom she would never taste. 5 days until everything ended. The countdown had begun, and there was no power in all of Midgard that could stop it. The wool fibers bit into Astrid's fingers as she worked the carding combs, pulling the tangled mass into straight lines over and over until her shoulders ached. 4 days now. 4 days since Gudrun had announced her fate like reading tomorrow's weather. The other thralls worked around her in careful silence, their eyes darting toward her and then away, as if proximity to her. Misfortune might be contagious. Astrid understood. In a world where you owned nothing, not even your own body, the only possession left was distance from others' suffering. Getting close meant feeling too much, and feeling too much made survival impossible. "They say his last wife died in childbirth." The whisper came from Agna, an older thrall with gray streaking her blonde braids and scars crossing her weathered hands. She didn't look at Astrid as she spoke, kept her eyes fixed on the spinning new wheel before her. Less than a year after the wedding, the baby died too. Boy child. Bjorn burned the bodies together on a pyre that lit up the sky for miles. Astrid's hands stilled on the wool. Her chest tightened, ribs suddenly too small to contain her lungs. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you should know." Agna's voice dropped even lower, barely audible over the rhythmic clacking of the loom where another thrall wove. "They say he blamed her, said she was too weak, too frail, said she'd wasted his seed on a child too feeble to live." He didn't mourn 3 days before he was back on the training grounds, laughing with his warriors like nothing had happened. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls of the longhouse pressing inward. Astrid forced her hands to move again, dragging the combs through wool that seemed to fight back, tangling worse with each pass. Her throat burned with words she couldn't say, questions she didn't want answered. Before her, there was another. This voice belonged to Signa, younger, maybe 16 winters, with a twisted foot that had probably saved her from being sold off or given away years ago. "Danish girl, traded in some peace settlement like you. She lasted 2 winters, fell down the stairs of their longhouse, broke her neck. Accidents happen," Astrid heard herself say, though the words tasted like ash. Sina's laugh was bitter as unripe berries. "Accidents. Yes, that's what they call it when a jarl's son's wife falls down. Stairs, when she falls down them 3 times before the fatal one, each time with new bruises, each time more afraid to speak." The carding combs slipped from Astrid's numb fingers, clattering against the wooden floor loud enough to make everyone freeze. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the crackling of the central fire and the distant calls of gulls over the fjord. Then Gudrun's voice cut through the silence like an axe through bone. "Clumsy girl." The jarl's wife appeared from the shadows. Near the sleeping quarters, her face sharp with irritation. "Those combs are worth more than you are. Pick them up and get back to work. The blue dress needs finishing by tomorrow, and you're wasting time gossiping like useless old hens." Astrid's hands shook as she retrieved the combs. The iron collar around her neck felt like it was shrinking, cutting off air, making spots dance at the edges of her vision. 2 wives, 2 dead women, and in 4 days, she would become the 3rd. The afternoon dragged on with brutal slowness. Astrid's fingers moved automatically, carding and spinning, while her mind raced like a trapped animal. She thought about running, just dropping everything and running toward the mountains, toward the dense forests where maybe, possibly, she could hide until winter killed her, or wolves found her, or starvation made the choice irrelevant. But thralls who ran and were caught faced punishments that made death look merciful. Flogging, branding, hamstringing so they could never run again. And Haldor would catch her. He had warriors, hunters, tracking dogs. She wouldn't make it past the first ridge before they dragged her back in chains heavier than the collar she already wore. "Walk with me." The voice came from directly behind her, so sudden and close that Astrid jumped, nearly dropping the combs again. She turned to find Leif standing there, his gray cloak pulled tight against the cold that seeped through every crack in the longhouse. Walls. His expression was careful, neutral, but something urgent moved behind his storm-colored eyes. "I have work," Astrid said automatically, glancing toward where Gudrun had disappeared back into the family quarters. "My mother sent me to check the grain stores. I need someone to help count the barrels." The lie was obvious, clumsy even, but Leif's tone carried enough authority that the other thralls wouldn't question it. Jarl's son, even the disappointing one, still outranked everyone in this room. Astrid set down the combs carefully, rose on legs that had gone numb from sitting, and followed Leif toward the back of the longhouse where they kept winter provisions. Her heart hammered against her ribs, hard enough to hurt. This was dangerous. Being alone with Haldor's son, even for innocent reasons, could spark rumors that would make her last 4 days here even more unbearable. The storage area was dim, lit only by thin shafts of light coming through gaps in the timber walls. The smell of dried fish, smoked meat, and fermenting grain hung thick in the cold air. Leif moved deeper into the shadows, past barrels of salted herring and hanging strips of whale meat, until they reached the far corner where no one could see them from the main hall. "You've heard the stories," Leif said without preamble. No question, just flat certainty. "About Bjorn's wives." Astrid's jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. "Does it matter? Whether I've heard them or not? Whether they're true or exaggerated? In 4 days I become his property. What difference does knowing make? Because you need to understand what you're walking into." Leif's voice dropped to barely a whisper, urgent and intense. "My father isn't sending you to a marriage. He's sending you to a grave. Bjorn Ironhand is exactly what they say he is. Brutal, cruel. He enjoys causing pain. The stories about his wives aren't exaggerations. If anything, they're sanitized versions of worse truths." The words hit like physical blows. Astrid's back hit the rough timber wall behind her, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. She slid down until she sat on the packed earth floor, arms wrapped tight around her knees, trying to hold herself together through sheer physical pressure. "Then why?" The question came out broken, desperate. "Why would your father do this? Send me to someone like that?" Leif crouched down in front of her close enough that she could see the genuine anguish in his face. "Because Bjorn threatened war. His clan is powerful, his warriors numerous and skilled. My father's hold on this settlement is weaker than he pretends. We lost too many men in last season's raids. We can't afford a conflict with Bjorn's forces. So my father does what Jarls have always done. He sacrifices the weakest to save the strong. I'm not weak." Astrid's voice came out fierce despite the tears burning behind her eyes. "I survived 7 years of this. I survived watching my family die. I survived being made into property. That's not weakness." "No," Leif agreed softly. "It's not. But in my father's world, you're disposable. Your life matters less than his reputation, less than the safety of his warriors, less than the peace he can buy with your suffering." The truth of it settled over Astrid like a burial shroud. She'd always known on some level that she meant nothing to these people. But hearing it spoken aloud, having the casual cruelty of it laid bare, somehow made it worse. More real. More inescapable. "There's something else you should know." Leif's voice changed, became harder, colder. 7 years ago, when your village was raided, the warriors who attacked, who killed your family, who took you captive, they were Bjorn's men. He led that raid personally. The world tilted sideways. Astrid's vision went dark at the edges, narrowing to a single point of horrible clarity. The massive warrior with the empty eyes, the one who had cut down Einar with casual efficiency. She saw him again in her memory, saw the dark beard, the scarred hands, the way he'd laughed as he'd dragged her toward the longship while her brother's blood steamed in the cold morning air. No. The word came out as a moan, animal and raw. No, no, no. I'm sorry. Leif's hand reached out, hesitated, then settled gently on her shoulder. The touch was meant to comfort but felt like brands burning through her clothes. I found out 2 days ago. I overheard my father and his advisors discussing it. They knew. They've always known. They're sending you to marry the man who murdered your brother, who destroyed your life. And they think it's justice because you're thrall, and thralls don't deserve justice. Astrid couldn't breathe. The iron collar was choking her, crushing her throat, cutting off air and blood and life. Her hands clawed at it uselessly, fingernails scraping against metal that wouldn't move, wouldn't break, wouldn't release her from 7 years of captivity that were about to become a lifetime of torture. She was going to die. In 4 days, she would be given to the man who had killed everyone she loved, and he would break her slowly, thoroughly, until there was nothing left but another body for another pyre. I won't do it. The words surprised her, coming from some deep place she didn't know still existed. I won't go to him. I'd rather die here now, by my own hand, than give him the satisfaction. There's another option. Leif's voice was steady now, determined. Run. Leave this place. I can help you. Astrid's head snapped up, eyes finding his in the dimness. Help me how? Your father would hunt me down within hours. Not if you had a head start. Not if someone created a distraction. Not if you had supplies, warm clothes, a direction to run that they wouldn't expect. Leif's fingers tightened on her shoulder. I've been thinking about this since I found out about Bjorn. There are ways. Dangerous ways, but possible. Hope was more painful than despair. Hope meant believing in the possibility of something better, which meant having something to lose all over again. Astrid wanted to reject it, to push life away, to retreat back into the numb acceptance that had kept her alive for 7 years. But when she looked at his face, saw the earnest determination there, saw someone actually seeing her as a person worth saving, something cracked in the wall she'd built around her heart. Why would you help me? She whispered. What do you get from this? Except your father's rage. Leif was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with something that sounded like shame. Because I've watched this happen my whole life. Watched people be used and discarded. Watched my father trade lives like they're game pieces. And I've done nothing. Said nothing. Been complicit through silence. His eyes met hers, intense and fierce. Maybe I can't change the whole system, but I can save one person. I can save you, if you'll let me. 3 days left, and Astrid couldn't stop watching the horizon. Every moment she wasn't under direct supervision, her eyes drifted toward the fjord, searching for black sails that would mean Bjorn's arrival, would mean time had run out, would mean the trap had finally closed around her throat. The waiting was its own form of torture, worse somehow than the certainty of the collar she'd worn for 7 years. At least the collar's weight was constant. This dread ebbed and flowed like tide water, sometimes receding enough that she could almost breathe, then crashing back over her with renewed force. Leif had found her twice more since their conversation in the storage room. Brief moments stolen between her duties, whispered plans that felt both impossible and like the only hope she had left. He'd mapped out a route through the mountains, away from the coastal settlements where Haldor's influence reached. There was a small monastery, he'd said, half a day's hard walk into the forest. Christian monks who sometimes sheltered refugees. They wouldn't ask questions if she claimed to be fleeing violence. They're fools, Leif had told her, his mouth twisted in something between contempt and admiration. They believe their God commands them to show mercy to the weak. We can use that foolishness to save you. But using it meant getting out of the settlement unseen, meant traveling alone through wilderness where wolves and worse things hunted, meant trusting that Christian mercy actually extended to a heathen thrall with a stolen iron collar still locked around her neck. It meant risking everything on the word of a man she barely knew, whose motivations she couldn't quite understand, whose kindness felt too genuine to be real. "You're distracted." Gudrun's voice cut through Astrid's thoughts like a blade through fabric. The Jarl's wife stood in the doorway of the weaving room, arms crossed, her expression sharp with suspicion. "The dress still isn't finished. Do you think Bjorn will be pleased to receive a bride in rags because you couldn't focus on simple work?" Astrid's fingers had indeed stopped moving on the loom before her. The blue fabric, fine and soft, mocked her with its beauty. Sheep had died to make this wool. Plants had been harvested and boiled to create this color. Hours of labor had gone into preparing threads that would dress her like a sacrifice on an altar. "Forgive me," Astrid said, the words automatic after 7 years of necessary submission. Her hands resumed their work, shuttle passing through the warp threads with practiced precision. "I'll have it ready in time." Gudrun's eyes narrowed, studying Astrid with an intensity that made sweat break out cold between her shoulder blades despite the room's chill. "You should be grateful, you know. Girls like you, taken in raids, usually end up in far worse circumstances. Trading posts where men pay in silver for an hour with a thrall, brothels in Dublin where you'd service 20 men a night until disease or violence killed you. At least Bjorn will make you a wife. You'll have status, position, a household to manage." The words were meant to sound reasonable, even kind. But Astrid heard the underlying message clearly enough. Be grateful for your cage. Be thankful your suffering has a pretty name. Die quietly and don't make trouble for those of us who matter. "Yes, my lady." The shuttle passed through again, back and forth, building the fabric thread by thread. Like building a prison, Astrid thought distantly. Every pass of the shuttle another bar across a window, another lock on a door. Gudrun lingered a moment longer, then turned with a dismissive sound and swept back toward the main hall where Astrid could hear Haldor's voice raised in discussion with his advisors. Planning, probably. Making sure every detail of the ceremony would be perfect, would properly honor Bjorn and his clan, would seal the peace they were buying with her life. "She suspects something." The whisper came from beside her, so quiet Astrid almost missed it. Sina sat at the next loom, her twisted foot tucked beneath her, her hands moving steadily through her own weaving. "I can see it in how she looks at you, like she's waiting for you to make a mistake." Astrid's heart kicked hard against her ribs. "There's nothing to suspect. I'm finishing the dress. I'm being obedient. What more does she want?" Enthusiasm. Sina's voice held dark humor. "She wants you grateful and excited to be given away. Your resignation offends her. Makes her feel guilty maybe, though I doubt she'd admit that even to herself." The shuttle passed through again. Astrid counted threads, focused on the mechanical repetition, tried to calm the panic clawing up her throat. If Gudrun suspected Leif was helping her, if she was watching more carefully, if security tightened around the settlement, then the already impossible escape would become truly unachievable. "The ceremony is set for dawn," Sina continued, her voice still barely audible. 3 days from now. Bjorn's ship should arrive the evening before. There's a feast planned, of course, mead and roasted meat, and all the warriors getting drunk and loud, celebrating the alliance. You'll be expected to attend, to be displayed like a prize mare before she's sold. Dawn. 3 days. 72 hours. Astrid's mind raced through the plan Leif had outlined. They'd have to move the night before the ceremony while everyone was drunk and distracted by the feast. Leif would create some excuse to leave, would meet her at the edge of the settlement near the old fishing shacks that no one used anymore in winter. He'd bring supplies, warm clothing, food enough for several days. Then she'd run. The simplicity of it terrified her. So many things could go wrong. Someone could see them. The guards might be more alert than expected. The weather could turn, making mountain travel suicidal. Wolves could find her. She could get lost. Even if everything went perfectly, if she somehow made it to the monastery, what then? The monks might turn her away, might send her back, might decide that harboring a runaway thrall wasn't worth angering a powerful jarl. I envy you in a way. Sina's words shocked Astrid from her spiraling thoughts. At least you're getting out of here. Even if it's to something worse, at least it's different. I'll die in this place probably. Wear out my usefulness and get discarded like broken tools. Get discarded. But you'll see other places. Live a different life. Astrid's hands stilled again on the loom. She turned to look at Sina, really look, and saw the deep exhaustion in the younger woman's eyes. How old was she actually? 16, 18? It was hard to tell. Thrall life aged people fast, carved years into faces and bent backs before their time. Would you run? Astrid asked, keeping her voice low. If you had the chance, would you try to escape? Sina's laugh was soft and infinitely sad. With this foot, I'd make it maybe half a mile before they caught me, and then they'd hamstring the other leg to make sure I never tried again. No, I'm too valuable as a weaver to kill, too crippled to run. I'm trapped here until I stop being useful. Her hands never stopped moving through her weaving, creating beauty she'd never own. But you're whole, strong, young enough to start over if you survive. If I were you, I'd run so hard and so far they'd never find even a shadow. The words hung in the cold air between them, heavy with meaning Astrid was afraid to fully acknowledge. Did Sina know? Had she guessed what Leif was planning? Or was this just wishful thinking, the fantasy that sustained thralls through endless days of labor and degradation? Before Astrid could respond, Agna entered the weaving room carrying an armload of fresh wool, her weathered face set in careful neutrality. But her eyes found Astrid's, held for just a heartbeat too long, and in that moment Astrid saw knowledge there, understanding, and something else, something that looked almost like approval. The older thralls knew, maybe not the details, but they sensed something was coming, and they weren't going to stop it. The realization sent ice water through Astrid's veins. If they knew, if they were choosing silence, that meant two things. First, that they cared enough to want her to escape. Second, that they understood perfectly the consequences if she was caught, and were willing to risk those consequences falling on all of them if suspicion spread. The blue looks beautiful, Agna said, examining Astrid's weaving with a critical eye. Bjorn will be pleased. Though honestly, you could show up in rags and he'd be pleased. Men like him don't care about clothes. They care about ownership, about taking things, about breaking things that were whole. Her fingers traced the fine blue fabric, and Astrid saw scars crossing the older woman's hands, old burns and cuts and marks that spoke of decades of hard labor. Agna had been a thrall her entire life, probably. Born into slavery, would die in slavery, had never known a single day of freedom. And yet here she stood, touching forbidden fabric with reverent fingers, speaking truths that could get her beaten. Make it perfect, Agna continued, her voice taking on layers of meaning. Make them think you've accepted your fate completely. Make them believe you're resigned, obedient, broken. That's how you survive. These final days, by becoming invisible in plain sight. Astrid understood. The message was clear. Stop watching the horizon. Stop looking distracted. Become the perfect thrall, the compliant bride-to-be. Draw no attention, raise no suspicions. Disappear into the role so completely that when the moment came to actually disappear, no one would be watching closely enough to stop her. Yes, Astrid said quietly. I'll make it perfect. She returned to the loom with renewed focus, her hands moving. Faster now, each thread placed with precision. The blue fabric grew beneath her fingers, beautiful and terrible, a shroud disguised as celebration. Around her, the other thralls worked in careful silence, their presence both comfort and warning. They were with her in whatever way enslaved people could be with each other, but they couldn't save her. That she'd have to do herself. Through the open doorway, Astrid heard men's voices raised in laughter. Haldor and his warriors, probably drinking. Already though the sun hadn't reached its peak. They were celebrating early, confident in their plan, secure in their power. They had no idea that the girl they'd traded away like livestock was planning to vanish like smoke, was choosing death in the wilderness over marriage to a monster. 3 days, 72 hours. Every second counted now. Astrid's fingers flew across the loom, building the last thing she'd ever make in this place, weaving her own disguise, thread by thread, preparing for the only moment of true choice she'd had in 7 years. The blue dress would be perfect, and then she would destroy it by never wearing it. 2 days remained when the black sail appeared on the horizon. Astrid was hauling water from the well when she saw it, a dark slash against the gray winter sky that made her drop the bucket with a splash that soaked her feet in icy water. Too early. Bjorn wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow evening. The plan, the careful timing Leif had worked out. Everything depended on one more full day of preparation. He's eager, it seems. Haldor's voice boomed across the settlement yard, jovial and loud, pitched to carry to everyone within earshot. The Jarl stood with several of his warriors, all of them watching the approaching longship, with expressions ranging from relief to calculation. A man doesn't sail a day early unless he's very interested in what's been promised to him. The warriors laughed, the sound harsh and knowing. Astrid felt their eyes slide toward her, assessing, judging, reducing her once again to an object whose only value was in being transferred from one owner to another. Her soaked feet had gone numb in the cold, but she barely noticed. Her entire body felt distant, disconnected, like she was watching this happen to someone else from very far away. Get her cleaned up and dressed. Gudrun appeared beside Astrid, her fingers closing around Astrid's upper arm with bruising force. The blue dress. Now, and fix your hair. You look like a drowned rat, and we won't present you to Bjorn Ironhand looking like something the dogs dragged in. The longship cut through the fjord water with terrifying speed, its dragon prow seeming to sniff out its destination like a predator tracking wounded prey. Astrid could see figures moving on the deck now, warriors checking weapons and adjusting their appearance for landfall. Somewhere among them was the man who had killed her brother, who had destroyed her entire world, who was coming to claim her as his prize for negotiated peace. Gudrun dragged her toward the longhouse, practically throwing her through the door into the dim interior. Strip, wash. The dress is laid out in my quarters. You have less than an hour before they beach the ship and start walking up from the shore. Move. Astrid's fingers shook as she pulled off her wet, work-stained clothing. One of the younger thralls brought a basin of warm water and rough soap, her eyes downcast, refusing to meet Astrid's gaze. The girl was maybe 14, close to the age Astrid had been when she was captured, 7 years ago. It felt like 7 lifetimes. The warm water stung against her cold skin as she washed away the grime of morning labor. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, moving through motions she had no control over. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. They still needed time. Leif still needed to gather supplies, to finalize the route, to create the distraction that would let her slip away during tomorrow night's feast. But there would be no feast tomorrow night. The feast would be tonight. And by tomorrow morning at dawn, she would be married to Bjorn Ironhand before she'd had any chance to run. Breathe. The word came soft and urgent. Astrid's head snapped up to find Agnes standing in the doorway, her weathered face tight with concern. You're breathing too fast. You'll faint. Slow down. Astrid hadn't realized she was hyperventilating, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow gasps that made spots dance at the edges of her vision. She forced herself to slow, to pull air deep into her lungs, to push it out in controlled exhales. Her heart still raced like a panicked horse, but at least the dizziness receded slightly. He came early, Astrid whispered. The plan, everything there's no time now. Agnes' eyes sharpened, confirming what Astrid had suspected. The older woman knew about the escape attempt, had probably known from the beginning. Plans change, adapt or die. That's how thralls survive. She moved closer, her voice dropping even lower. The feast will still happen tonight. Warriors don't pass up free mead and food. You'll still have your moment. It'll just be sooner, more rushed, more dangerous. More dangerous. As if the original plan hadn't been suicidal enough. Astrid pulled on the blue dress, her fingers clumsy on the intricate lacings. The fabric felt wrong against her skin, too fine, too beautiful for what was. Essentially, a funeral shroud. Agna moved to help with the lacings, her scarred hands surprisingly gentle. "You're braver than you know," Agna murmured as she worked. "Most people, they accept what's done to them. They break and stay broken. But you're still fighting. Even after 7 years, you're still fighting. That's worth something." Was it? Astrid wasn't sure. Fighting felt less like courage and more like desperation. The thrashing of a drowning person who hasn't yet accepted that the water has already won. But she didn't say that. Just stood still while Agna finished the lacings, while another thrall approached with a comb to work through the tangles in Astrid's long blonde hair. Through the longhouse walls, she could hear shouts from outside. The ship had beached. Warriors were disembarking. Any moment now, Bjorn would walk into this settlement, would see her, would look at her with those same empty eyes she remembered from 7 years ago. Would he recognize her? Did men like him even remember the faces of the children they orphaned, the families they destroyed? There. Agna stepped back, examining her work with a critical eye. "You look like a Jarl's bride now, beautiful and terrified and doomed. Everything men like Bjorn expect to see." The words should have stung, but they just settled over Astrid like another layer of clothing. Beautiful and terrified and doomed. Yes, that's exactly what she was. What she'd been for 7 years, really, just dressed in work. Clothes instead of wedding blue. "Astrid." Leif's voice came from the doorway, urgent and low. He glanced over his shoulder, checking for observers, then stepped into the room. His face was pale, his gray eyes wide with something close to panic. "We need to talk, now, before they call for you." Agna melted away without a word, taking the other thralls with her, leaving Astrid and Leif alone in the dim space. Astrid's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She'd never seen Leif look scared before. Worried, yes. Concerned, but not this stark, cold fear that made his hands shake as he reached for her. "Tonight," he said, the words tumbling out fast. "It has to be tonight, during the feast. I've been talking to the servants, the ones who'll be serving the mead. I can get something into the drinks. Not enough to kill anyone, just enough to make them sick, distracted. Food poisoning from bad fish, they'll think. In the chaos, while everyone's focused on the warriors. Puking their guts out, you run. I'll meet you at the fishing shacks like we planned, but earlier. As soon as you see men starting to get ill, you go." Astrid stared at him. "You're going to poison half the warriors at your father's feast?" "Not poison, not really. Just enough to cause violent stomach upset. Embarrassing, but not fatal. They'll be too busy dealing with the consequences to notice one thrall slipping away." Leif's hands gripped her shoulders, his fingers pressing hard enough to hurt. Through the fine blue fabric. "It's risky, more risky than waiting. But waiting isn't an option anymore. If we don't do this tonight, tomorrow you'll be married and gone, sailing away to Bjorn's settlement where I can't help you." The plan was insane, reckless. Leif could be caught, could be implicated, could face his father's rage for sabotaging a peace treaty. The risk he was taking, for her, for a thrall he barely knew, made no logical sense. Unless, "Why are you really doing this, Astrid?" asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't tell me it's guilt or righteousness. People don't risk everything for strangers because of abstract principles. So why? What am I to you that's worth all this?" Leif's jaw worked silently for a moment, emotions flickering across his face too fast to name. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. "Because I'm in love with you. Have been for months, maybe longer. Watching you work. Seeing how you've survived without breaking. The way you look at the horizon like you're seeing something beyond what's in front of you. I know it's foolish. I know you probably think I'm an idiot, a weak Jarl's son who writes poems instead of wielding axes. But I can't. I won't let them give you to that monster. Even if you run away and I never see you again, even if you end up hating me for forcing this choice on you, at least you'll be free. At least you'll have a chance." The confession hung between them like something physical, something Astrid could almost reach out and touch. Love. He'd said, love. The word felt foreign, almost incomprehensible. She'd spent 7 years believing she was incapable of inspiring anything in free people except contempt or indifference. The idea that Leif, quiet, strange Leif with his poems and his gentle hands, had been watching her, caring about her, falling for her, seemed as impossible as sprouting wings and flying away. I don't know what to say, Astrid managed. Don't say anything. Just survive. Promise me you'll run when the moment comes. Promise me you won't hesitate or second guess or try to be noble. His hands moved from her shoulders to cradle her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with devastating tenderness. Promise me, Astrid. Astrid! Gudrun's voice cut through the moment like an axe. They're calling for you. Bjorn wants to see his bride. Move. Leif dropped his hands and stepped back, his expression shuddering back into careful neutrality. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, held Astrid's for one more heartbeat, and in them she saw everything he hadn't said. Desperation, hope, fear, love. Tonight, he mouthed silently. Then he turned and left, disappearing into the shadows of the longhouse like he'd never been there at all. Astrid's hands smoothed down the blue dress, feeling the fine weave beneath her palms, the dress she'd woven herself to be married in. Tonight, one way or another, tonight would determine everything. Either she'd escape or she'd die trying. There were no other options left. She walked toward the doorway, toward the settlement yard where Bjorn Ironhand was waiting to claim his prize. Her feet moved steadily despite the terror singing through every nerve. She'd been terrified for 7 years. Terror was just another weight to carry, like the iron collar around her neck. Bjorn Ironhand was exactly as Astrid remembered, and somehow worse for being seen through adult eyes instead of a terrified child's. He stood in the center of Haldor's hall, massive and broad-shouldered, his dark beard braided with silver rings that caught the firelight. The empty eyes she remembered were the same, flat and cold as river stones, assessing her the way a farmer might assess livestock at market, calculating value, checking for defects. She's small. His voice rumbled deep from his chest, not quite disapproving, but not pleased either. Your message said she was strong, healthy. She looks like a strong wind would. Snap her in half. Astrid stood where Gudrun had positioned her, hands clasped in front of her blue dress, head bowed in the posture of submission she'd perfected over 7 years. Every instinct screamed to run, to fight, to do anything except stand docile while her brother's killer examined her like merchandise. But running now would be suicide. The hall was packed with warriors, Bjorn's and Haldor's both, all of them armed, all of them watching this transaction with varying degrees of interest. She's stronger than she looks. Haldor's voice carried false joviality, the tone of a merchant making a sale. 7 years she's worked my household without complaint, good with weaving, with cooking, with any task you set her to, and young enough to give you many children, strong sons to carry your name. The mention of children made Astrid's stomach clench. She thought of the 2 dead wives, the baby that had died with its mother, the Danish girl who'd fallen downstairs until her neck broke. Strong sons. As if she was a brood mare whose only purpose was producing heirs until her body gave out, or Bjorn's patience did. Come here. Bjorn's command was casual, but Astrid heard the steel beneath it. The tone of a man who expected absolute obedience, who had never been refused anything in his life. Her feet moved before her mind caught up, carrying her across the packed earth floor until she stood directly before him. He smelled of salt and leather and something metallic that might have been old blood worked into his clothes. His hand shot out, fingers closing around her jaw, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. His grip was just shy of painful, a demonstration of strength and control. Astrid kept her eyes downcast, staring at the hollow of his throat rather than meeting those empty eyes directly. Up close, she could see scars crossing his knuckles, his forearms, his neck. A lifetime of violence written on his body like text. Look at me. Another command. Astrid's eyes lifted slowly, finally meeting his, and the recognition that flickered there made her blood turn to ice. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew who she was. Not her name, probably, but he recognized her from that raid 7 years ago, saw the connection, and the slight smile that curved his lips told her he was pleased by it. "You're from that coastal settlement," he said. "Not really a question. The one we burned. I remember you. You were screaming over your brother's body. Such noise for such a small thing." His thumb pressed harder against her jawbone, and Astrid tasted blood where she'd bitten the inside of her cheek to keep from crying out. "You've grown. Filled out nicely. Quieter now, too. Good. I don't like loud women." The hall had gone silent. Every person in the room was watching this interaction, reading the power dynamic, understanding the message Bjorn was sending. This wasn't about peace or alliances. This was about possession, about taking something from Haldor's household and marking it as his own, about asserting dominance through casual cruelty dressed up as formal courtesy. "She pleases you, then?" Haldor's voice had taken on a careful neutrality. He'd seen what Astrid had seen, understood that something darker was happening here than simple bride inspection. But he couldn't back out now, couldn't risk offending Bjorn by withdrawing the offered bride. The trap had already closed, on both of them. Bjorn released Astrid's jaw with a dismissive gesture, turning back to Haldor with a broad smile that never reached his eyes. "She'll do. We'll complete the ceremony at dawn as planned. Tonight, we feast. Tomorrow, I take my bride home and we cement our alliance with proper vows before the gods." The warriors erupted in cheers, raising drinking horns and axes in celebration. Astrid stood frozen, her jaw throbbing where Bjorn's fingers had pressed, her mind racing. Dawn. Less than 12 hours. She had to survive the feast, wait for Leif's signal, slip away in the chaos and run faster than she'd ever run in her life. Every second between now and then was borrowed time. "Go help prepare the feast." Gudrun appeared at Astrid's elbow, her voice low and sharp. "Make yourself useful, and stop looking like you're attending your own funeral. Smile, pretend you're honored. Give Bjorn no reason to be displeased before the ceremony." Astrid nodded mutely and retreated toward the kitchen area where thralls were already preparing massive quantities of food. Whole pigs turning on spits, fish roasting over open flames, bread baking in clay ovens, barrels of mead being rolled out and opened. The feast would be enormous, excessive, a display of Haldor's wealth and hospitality. And somewhere in all that food and drink, Leif would introduce whatever substance he'd acquired to make the warriors ill. "Here." Sina thrust a knife and a pile of root vegetables at Astrid. "Chop these. Keep your hands busy and your face neutral. I can see you shaking." "From here." Astrid's hands were indeed trembling, making the knife waver dangerously as she began cutting turnips into chunks. The rhythm of it helped, gave her something to focus on, besides the growing terror threatening to overwhelm her completely. Chop, chop, chop. Each cut a second closer to either freedom or death. "He recognized you." Sina's whisper was barely audible over the noise of food preparation and the growing revelry in the hall. "I saw it on his face. He knows you're from the village he raided." "Yes." The word came out flat, dead. "He remembers. He's pleased about it." Sina's hands stilled on the bread dough she was kneading. "Gods. That's worse than I thought. He doesn't just want a bride. He wants to complete his conquest, to own every piece of what he destroyed that day." The analysis was correct and made Astrid want to vomit. She'd been trying not to think about the psychological dimensions of this, the sick pleasure Bjorn clearly took in not just marrying a thrall, but specifically marrying the orphaned survivor of his own violence. It was domination layered on domination, cruelty wrapped in legal ceremony. Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. The feast was laid out on long tables, more food than Astrid had seen in months. The warriors fell on it like starving wolves, Bjorn and his men mixing with Haldor's, the careful political dance of forced camaraderie playing out over mead horns and roasted meat. Astrid and the other thralls moved among them, serving, refilling drinks, clearing plates, invisible as always except when someone wanted something. Bjorn's eyes followed her whenever she came near his section of the table, not with desire exactly, more like a hunter watching prey he'd already caught, just enjoying the knowledge that it couldn't escape. Once, when she leaned across to refill his mead horn, his hand shot out and caught her wrist, holding it just long enough to make her heart stop, then releasing her with a laugh that made the other warriors join in like he'd told a hilarious joke. The sun set. Torches were lit. The drinking increased, voices growing louder, laughter more raucous. Astrid watched for Leif among the servants, searching for any signal, any sign that the plan was moving forward. She spotted him near the kitchens, speaking urgently with one of the older thralls who oversaw food preparation. Money changed hands, too quick to be noticed by anyone not watching carefully. Then Leif's eyes found hers across the crowded hall, and he gave the smallest nod. It was happening. Now. Whatever he'd arranged was in motion. Astrid's pulse roared in her ears, drowning out the noise of the feast. She forced herself to keep moving naturally, filling horns, collecting plates, being invisible. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The warriors kept drinking, kept eating, showing no signs of distress. Had it failed? Had Leif's plan not worked? Then one of Bjorn's warriors stood abruptly, his face going pale and sweaty. He staggered toward the door, hand pressed to his stomach. Another followed moments later, then another. Within minutes, half the men in the hall were groaning, holding their bellies, rushing outside to relieve themselves of whatever was making them violently ill. Chaos erupted. Accusations flew about spoiled fish, bad meat, cursed food. Halldor was shouting for his servants, demanding to know what had gone wrong. Bjorn was on his feet, face dark with rage, suspecting sabotage, but too busy fighting his own rebellious stomach to do much about it. Warriors stumbled over each other trying to get outside, the hall filling with the sounds and smells of mass food poisoning. Astrid saw Leif near the kitchen entrance. He caught her eye and mouthed one word. "Go." She didn't hesitate. While everyone was distracted, focused on the sick warriors and the argument about whose fault this was, Astrid slipped toward the back entrance of the longhouse. Her heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe, adrenaline making her hands shake and her vision narrow to a tunnel. She was really doing this, really running. The cold night air hit her face like a slap as she stepped outside. She could hear retching and cursing from the front of the longhouse, but the back was clear. The fishing shacks were maybe 200 paces away, dark shapes against the darker forest beyond. Astrid gathered her skirts and ran. The blue dress caught on brambles and roots as Astrid ran, the fine fabric tearing with soft sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the darkness. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed protest, but she didn't slow, couldn't slow. Behind her, the settlement was erupting into fuller chaos, shouts overlapping, torches being lit, someone yelling about finding the thrall, about checking the perimeter. They'd noticed her absence faster than expected, much faster. The fishing shacks materialized from the darkness like skeletal fingers reaching toward the sky. Astrid crashed through the doorway of the nearest one, gasping for breath that wouldn't come fast enough, her vision swimming with spots. Where was Leif? He'd said he'd meet her here, that he'd bring supplies, warm clothing, food. The shack was empty except for rotting nets and the smell of old fish guts. "Please," she whispered to the darkness, to any god who might be listening. "Please let him come. Please don't let this have been for nothing." Footsteps crunched on frozen ground outside. Astrid's whole body went rigid, terror flooding through her so completely she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except wait to be discovered. Then Leif's voice, low and urgent. "Astrid, are you here?" She nearly sobbed with relief. "Yes, I'm here." He appeared in the doorway, arms loaded with a thick wool cloak, a leather pack, and what looked like a fur-lined tunic and leggings. His face was flushed from running, his eyes wide with fear and something that might have been exhilaration. We have to go now. They're organizing search parties. My father is convinced this was planned, not spontaneous. He's already questioning servants. Astrid's fingers fumbled with the laces of the blue dress, yanking them loose with desperate strength. The fabric pooled at her feet, and she grabbed the warmer clothes Leif offered, pulling them on with shaking hands. The tunic smelled like him, like wool and wood smoke and something indefinably gentle that made her chest ache. These were his clothes. He'd given her his own clothes. Here. Leif fastened the cloak around her shoulders, his fingers brushing her neck near the iron collar that still locked around her throat. I couldn't find the key. I'm sorry. You'll have to keep wearing it until you find someone who can remove it. The collar. Of course. 7 years she'd worn it, and it would follow her into whatever came next. A permanent brand marking her as property, as thrall, as less than human. But there was no time to mourn that particular injustice. Leif was right. They had to move. The monastery, Leif said, shouldering his own pack. Half a day's walk northeast through the forest. There's a path barely visible, but it's there. Follow the stream until you reach a split oak tree, then turn east. The monks have a clearing. You'll see the wooden cross before you see the buildings. Half a day. Astrid tried to calculate distances, tried to imagine walking all night through hostile wilderness with search parties hunting her. The impossibility of it threatened to crush her completely. Come with me, she heard herself say. Leif, come with me. Don't go back there. His face crumpled with something that looked like physical pain. I can't. If I disappear too, they'll know for certain I helped you. They'll send twice as many men searching. But if I go back, if I act confused and concerned, if I help search in the wrong directions, I can buy you time. His hands came up to frame her face, the gesture achingly familiar from that moment in the longhouse. This is where we part, Astrid. This is where you survive without me. No. The word broke on a sob she'd been holding back for hours. No, I can't. I don't know how to do this alone. You've been doing things alone for 7 years. His thumbs wiped tears from her cheeks, gentle and devastating. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You'll survive this. You'll make it to the monastery, and the monks will help you. And you'll build a new life somewhere far from here. Somewhere he can't reach you. The he was Bjorn. They both knew it. Even if Astrid escaped tonight, even if she made it to the monastery and found shelter, Bjorn wouldn't forget. Men like him never forgot. He'd see her escape as theft, as a personal insult that demanded vengeance. He might look for her for weeks, months, years. She would never truly be safe, but she'd be free. And freedom, even dangerous freedom, was worth more than safe captivity. I love you. The words came out before Astrid could stop them, raw and honest. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. I love you, and I'm sorry I can't give you more than this moment. This stolen goodbye in a rotting fishing shack. Leif's smile was heartbreaking in its tenderness. You've given me everything that matters. You've given me purpose. You've made me brave when I've been afraid my whole life. You've shown me what it means to fight for something real instead of just surviving. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the cold air. I will remember you every day for the rest of my life. And I'll be grateful I knew you, even for this brief, impossible time. Shouting erupted closer now, multiple voices coordinating search patterns. Torchlight flickered through gaps in the shack's walls. They were out of time. Leif pulled back, his eyes reflecting the distant flames. Go. Now. Don't look back. Don't stop. Promise me. Astrid wanted to argue, to refuse, to somehow make this moment last longer. But the torches were getting brighter, the voices louder, and staying meant capture, meant death for both of them. She grabbed the pack, adjusted the cloak, and forced her legs to move toward the back of the shack where a gap in the walls led directly into the tree line. Leif, she whispered, turning back one last time. Thank you for seeing me, for caring, for everything. He was already moving toward the front entrance, preparing to emerge and join the search party. to misdirect and mislead and buy her precious minutes. But he paused, looked back, and the expression on his face held everything words couldn't contain. Love. Hope. Goodbye. Then Astrid was through the gap and running into the forest, branches whipping her face, roots trying to trip her, darkness so complete she was navigating more by feel than sight. Behind her, she heard Leif's voice raised in false alarm. Over here, I heard something. Toward the shore! Footsteps and shouts moving in the wrong direction, away from where she actually ran. The forest swallowed her. Trees became walls on all sides, their bare branches skeletal against the night sky. Astrid's breath came in ragged gasps that burned her throat and chest. The pack bounced against her back with each stride, and the cloak kept trying to tangle in undergrowth, but she didn't slow, couldn't slow. Her survival depended on distance, on putting as much ground between herself and the settlement as possible before they realized Leif had misdirected them. She ran until her legs gave out, until she collapsed against a massive oak tree with bark rough enough to scrape through the cloak against her back. Her whole body shook with exhaustion and residual terror. How long had she been running? Minutes? Hours? Time had become meaningless, measured only in heartbeats and gasping breaths, and the diminishing sounds of pursuit behind her. Astrid forced herself to listen. No voices, no torches. Just the night sounds of the forest, wind through bare branches and the distant call of an owl hunting. Either they'd lost her trail completely, or they were being very quiet. She couldn't risk assuming safety. Had to keep moving. Had to find the stream Leif had mentioned, the split oak, the monastery beyond. Her hands fumbled with the pack, searching for what Leif had included. Dried meat wrapped in cloth, hard bread, a water skin, a small knife, barely more than a eating utensil, but sharp enough to be useful. And beneath everything else, something that made Astrid's breath catch. A folded piece of parchment with writing on it. She couldn't read it in the darkness, but she held it against her chest anyway. This last gift from the man who'd loved her enough to set her free. Standing was agony. Her legs trembled, threatening to dump her back on the frozen ground, but Astrid gritted her teeth and pushed upright, using the oak tree for support. Northeast. Follow the stream. Find the split oak. Reach the monastery. Simple directions that felt impossibly complex in the darkness and cold and exhaustion. She stumbled forward, one foot in front of the other, each step a small victory over the body that wanted to quit, the mind that whispered about the futility of running. But she'd made a promise. To Leif, to herself, to the girl she'd been 7 years ago, watching her brother die, believing the world held nothing but cruelty. The world did hold cruelty, but it also held moments of grace. Acts of love so profound they defied logic. People like Leif who risked everything for someone society said didn't matter. That had to mean something. That had to be worth surviving for. Hours blurred together. Astrid walked and sometimes ran and occasionally crawled when the terrain got too difficult. The stream appeared eventually, a ribbon of black water reflecting starlight, and she followed it northeast like Leif had instructed. Her feet went numb inside the tub. Boots he'd provided. Her face burned from cold and scratches. The iron collar pressed against her throat with every swallow, every breath. A reminder of what she'd escaped and what she still carried. Dawn was maybe 3 hours away when Astrid saw it. The split oak, massive and ancient, its trunk divided by some long-ago lightning strike into two distinct halves that somehow still lived. She nearly wept with relief. East from here, just east, and she'd find the monastery, find shelter, find safety, however temporary. She turned east and kept walking, one foot in front of the other, carrying everything she had left into the uncertain darkness ahead. The wooden cross rose from the clearing like a promise Astrid was afraid to believe in. Dawn light filtered through the trees, pale and cold, illuminating the small cluster of buildings that made up the monastery. Simple structures, rough-hewn timber with thatched roofs, nothing like the grand stone churches she'd heard travelers describe. But to Astrid, stumbling from the tree line with frozen feet and exhaustion dragging at every limb, it looked like salvation itself. She'd made it. Against impossible odds, through a night of terror and physical agony that had pushed her body past every limit she thought she had, she'd actually made it. The realization hit her so hard her legs finally gave out completely, dropping her to her knees in the frost-covered grass at the clearing's edge. Her hands pressed against the frozen ground, and a sob tore from her throat. Then another, 7 years of held tears suddenly flooding out in great shaking gasps that hurt worse than running had. "Child." The voice was gentle, accented strangely, the Norse tinged with something foreign. Astrid's head jerked up to find a man in rough brown robes standing a few paces away, his face weathered and kind beneath gray hair cut in the strange style Christians favored. "You are hurt?" pursued. Astrid tried to speak but couldn't force words. Past the tightness in her throat, she gestured helplessly behind her, toward the forest she'd escaped through, and the monk's expression shifted from concern to understanding. He'd seen this before, she realized. Other desperate people stumbling from the wilderness seeking sanctuary. She wasn't the first, wouldn't be the last. "Come." He moved closer slowly, carefully, like Leif had when approaching her at Haldor's longhouse a lifetime ago. "Let us bring you inside. You are safe here. No one will harm you within these walls. This is God's promise, and we keep it faithfully. God." The Christian God Leif had mentioned, the one whose foolish mercy would shelter her. Astrid didn't believe in any gods, Norse or Christian, not after what she'd lived through. But if their superstitions meant food and warmth and a place to hide, she'd pretend to believe in anything they wanted. The monk helped her stand, supporting most of her weight as he guided her across the clearing toward the largest building. Other monks emerged from various structures, their faces registering concern and curiosity at her appearance. Astrid knew what she must look like. Wild-eyed, scratched and bleeding from branches, wearing men's clothing under a cloak too fine to be hers, and most damning of all, the iron thrall collar locked around her neck announcing her status to anyone with eyes. "Brother Marcus, is that a slave collar?" One of the younger monks spoke in rapid, heavily accented Norse, his eyes wide with horror and pity. "Should we not remove it immediately? We will see to her needs inside, Brother Thomas." The older monk, Marcus apparently, kept his tone gentle but firm. "She is clearly exhausted and injured. Warmth and food first, then we address other concerns." The interior of the building was dim and smelled of wood smoke and something herbal Astrid couldn't identify. A large room with rough wooden benches, a table, and a hearth where a fire burned low. Marcus guided her to a bench near the fire and draped another blanket over the cloak she already wore. Within moments, another monk appeared with a steaming bowl of something that smelled like heaven. "Porridge with honey," Marcus explained, pressing the bowl into her trembling hands. "Eat slowly. Your stomach will rebel if you rush after such exertion." Astrid had forgotten the meaning of slow. She devoured the porridge in desperate gulps that burned her mouth and throat, not caring, just needing the warmth and substance of it filling the hollow ache inside her. The monks watched with expressions of deep sympathy that made her want to scream. She didn't want their pity, didn't want to be another sad story they'd tell each other about the cruelties of the pagan world beyond their walls. But she needed their help. So she finished the porridge, accepted a second bowl when it was offered, and tried not to flinch when Marcus gently examined the scratches covering her face and hands. "You've traveled far," he said, not quite a question. "And you are running from something, or someone. The collar suggests you were enslaved. Are you seeking sanctuary from your master?" The word master made bile rise in Astrid's throat. "I was to be married," she managed, her voice rough from crying and exhaustion. "To a man who killed my family, who would have killed me too, eventually. I ran. A friend helped me escape. He said you might shelter me." Marcus's weathered face grew even more grave. "This friend, he knew of our work here? He knew you take in people with nowhere else to go, that your God commands it?" Astrid met the monk's eyes, seeing calculation there alongside the compassion. I'm not asking for charity. I can work. I can weave, cook, clean, anything you need. I just need somewhere to hide until it's safe to move on. Safe. Marcus repeated the word like tasting something bitter. Child, there is much you must understand about the nature of sanctuary. When we take someone in, when we declare them under God's protection, we are making a declaration of war against whoever pursues them. We are small. We have no warriors, no weapons beyond our faith. If your master comes demanding your return, all we can offer is our witness and our prayers. The implications settled over Astrid like ice water. The monastery couldn't actually protect her, not against Bjorn and his warriors, not against Haldor's men if they tracked her here. All these monks could do was refuse to hand her over and hope their religious status meant something to men who worshipped different gods entirely. But we will try. Marcus continued, his voice strengthening with conviction. We will bear witness that you sought sanctuary, that you were fleeing violence and forced marriage. We will document your story, should anyone come asking, and we will help you reach somewhere safer when the time comes. There are Christian settlements to the south, places where Norse law holds less power. You could find refuge there, perhaps. South. More running. More hiding. The rest of her life lived in the margins, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for Bjorn's shadow to fall across her path. But it was still better than the alternative. Better than dawn ceremonies and bruises and eventually falling downstairs that would break more than bones. The collar. Brother Thomas spoke up again, his young face earnest. Surely we must remove it. It is a symbol of her oppression, of everything. Unchristian and wrong. Marcus studied the iron band around Astrid's neck with thoughtful eyes. Do you wish it removed? He asked her directly. We have tools that might work, though I confess we have little experience with such things. Did she? The collar was branding, marking, constant reminder of 7 years of captivity. But it was also the only thing keeping her throat warm in the bitter cold. And more than that, some part of her felt like removing it would be claiming a freedom she hadn't truly earned yet. Not while Bjorn still hunted her. Not while she still lived in fear. Not yet, Astrid heard herself say. When I'm truly free, when I'm safe enough to stop running, then I'll have it removed, but not before. I need to remember why I keep going. The monks exchanged glances laden with meanings Astrid couldn't decipher. Finally, Marcus nodded. As you wish. You may rest here as long as you need. We ask only that you respect our practices. We pray at set hours, work the land in season, live simply. You would be expected to participate in the work, but not the worship unless you choose to. I'll work. Astrid could barely keep her eyes open, exhaustion finally overwhelming the adrenaline that had kept her moving through the night. I'll do whatever you need. Just let me stay. Please. Just for a little while. Rest now. Marcus helped her lie down on the bench, adjusting the blankets around her with surprising gentleness. You are safe within these walls. Sleep. Without fear, child. God watches over you here. God or no God? Astrid's eyes closed almost involuntarily. The fire's warmth soaked into her frozen body, and the solid walls around her felt like protection, even though she knew how fragile that protection truly was. Her last conscious thought was of Leif, wondering if he'd made it back to the settlement safely, if Haldor suspected his involvement, if he was suffering consequences for her freedom. She hoped he was safe, hoped his sacrifice hadn't been for nothing, hoped that somewhere in this brutal world, kindness wasn't always punished with cruelty. Then sleep claimed her completely, dragging her down into darkness that held no dreams, just the deep unconsciousness of a body pushed past every limit. She slept through most of that day, waking only when Brother Thomas gently shook her shoulder as afternoon light slanted through the small windows. You should eat again, he said in his careful Norse, and drink. You were badly dehydrated. Astrid sat up slowly, every muscle in her body screaming protest. She accepted the food and water Thomas offered, forcing herself to eat despite having no appetite. Her mind felt clearer now, sharper, the fog of exhaustion lifting enough to let reality settle in properly. She'd escaped. She was alive. She was free, or as close to free as a thrall with a collar and no legal standing could be. It wasn't safety, wasn't security, wasn't the justice she deserved, but it was possibility. It was choice. It was the chance to build something from the ashes of everything she'd lost. Through the window, Astrid could see the forest stretching endlessly, dark and deep and full of paths that led away from here. South, Marcus had said. Christian settlements where Norse power was weaker. New names, new lives, new chances. The iron collar pressed against her throat with every swallow. A reminder, a brand, a weight she chose to carry until she'd truly earned the right to set it down. Someday, she told herself, someday she'd be far enough away, safe enough, strong enough to have it removed. To stand as herself, unburdened, no longer defined by what had been done to her. But not today. Today she would rest and heal and prepare for whatever came next. Because something always came next. The world didn't stop being cruel just because you escaped one form of cruelty. But Astrid was still here, still fighting, still choosing survival over surrender. That had to count for something. 4 days passed in the monastery's quiet rhythm before they came. 4 days of prayer bells and simple meals and the slow healing of a body pushed past its breaking point. Astrid worked alongside the monks, learning their strange ways, their insistence on thanking their God for everything from sunrise to bread that didn't burn. She didn't understand their faith, but she respected the peace it seemed to give them, the certainty that something larger than human cruelty watched over the world. On the 5th morning, Brother Thomas burst into the kitchen where Astrid was grinding grain, his young face pale with fear. Riders, coming from the north, armed men, many of them. The wooden pestle slipped from Astrid's numb fingers, clattering against the stone mortar. She'd known this moment would come, had been preparing for it in the quiet hours when sleep wouldn't come, and her mind raced through scenarios. But knowing and experiencing were different things. Her legs wanted to run, to flee into the forest again, to keep running until there was nowhere left to run to. How many? Marcus appeared in the doorway, his weathered face grave but calm. At least 20. Maybe more. They're flying a banner, black with a silver axe. Thomas's hands twisted in his brown robes. They'll be here within the hour. Bjorn's banner. Astrid had seen it that day at Haldor's settlement, hanging from the mast of his longship. 20 warriors meant serious pursuit, meant Bjorn had dedicated significant resources to hunting her down. The depth of his rage must be profound, she realized. She'd humiliated him, stolen herself back, made him look weak before Haldor's household. Men like Bjorn didn't forgive that kind of insult. You should go to the chapel. Marcus moved toward Astrid with surprising speed for his age, his hands settling on her shoulders with gentle firmness. Hide there, pray if you wish, or simply be still. We will speak with these men. We will not betray your presence unless they force us to. They'll force you. Astrid's voice came out steadier than she felt. They'll threaten violence. Maybe use it. I won't let you suffer for harboring me. That is not your choice to make. Marcus's tone held steel beneath the gentleness. We chose to shelter you. We knew the risks. Our faith demands we protect those who seek sanctuary, regardless of consequence. Do not diminish our sacrifice by surrendering out of misguided nobility. The words hit harder than any blow. Astrid had spent 7 years believing her life held no value, that her suffering meant nothing to anyone. The idea that these monks, these strangers who owed her nothing, would willingly face danger on her behalf defied everything she'd learned about how the world worked. Go, Marcus insisted, guiding her toward the door. The chapel. Behind the altar there is a small storage space, crude hiding but perhaps enough. Go now, child. Astrid's feet carried her across the compound toward the small wooden chapel, her heart hammering so hard she could barely hear over the rush of blood in her ears. The chapel was dim and smelled of beeswax and incense, foreign and strange but somehow comforting. She found the space Marcus had mentioned, a narrow gap between the back wall and a heavy wooden storage chest, barely large enough for a person to squeeze into, but it would have to do. She wedged herself in, pressing her back against rough timber, her knees drawn up to her chest. Through cracks in the wood, she could see slivers of the chapel interior, the simple cross mounted above the altar, the few benches where monks knelt for prayer. Her breathing sounded impossibly loud in the confined space. She tried to slow it, to quiet the panic threatening to overwhelm her completely. The sound of horses reached her first. Many horses, their hooves thundering against frozen ground. Then voices, loud and demanding. Bjorn's voice, unmistakable, cutting through the morning air like an axe through flesh. "We seek a runaway thrall. Young woman, blonde, wearing an iron collar. She fled 4 nights ago from Jarl Haldor's settlement. We have reason to believe she came this way." Marcus's response was calmer, measured. "We are a place of peace and prayer. We shelter those in need, as our faith commands. But we do not interrogate those who seek sanctuary about their pasts." A long silence. Then the sound of boots on wood as warriors entered the main building. Astrid heard furniture being overturned, voices raised in anger, the monks' protests ignored completely. They were searching, methodically going through every structure in the compound. "The chapel." Bjorn's voice again, closer now. "Check the chapel." Footsteps approached. The chapel door crashed open with enough force to make the whole structure shudder. Astrid pressed herself deeper into the hiding space, making herself as small as possible, barely breathing. Through the cracks, she watched warriors enter, 3 of them, axes in hand. They moved through the small space quickly, checking behind benches, under altar cloths. One of them approached the storage chest. Astrid's heart stopped completely as he gripped the edge, preparing to drag it aside and reveal her hiding place. This was it. After everything, after the escape and the running and the brief taste of freedom, it ended here, discovered in a Christian chapel by men who worshipped different gods. "Stop." The voice was unexpected, young, urgent. "Leave the chapel. It's sacred space. Even we shouldn't desecrate it further." The warrior paused, glanced at whoever had spoken. "Leif, your father sent you with us?" Leif. Astrid's breath caught in her throat. Leif was here, with Bjorn's warriors, participating in her pursuit. Betrayal cut through her sharper than any blade. He'd helped her escape only to join the hunt days later. Had it all been some elaborate trick? Some way to gain Haldor's favor by appearing useful? "My father wants her." Found. Leif's voice held none of the gentleness she remembered, none of the warmth that had made her believe in his sincerity. "But she's not here. I can feel it. The chapel is empty. We're wasting time that could be spent checking the forest trails." Another pause. Then the warrior released the chest and moved away. "You're probably right. Let's check the other buildings again. Maybe there's a cellar we missed." The footsteps retreated. The chapel door closed. Astrid stayed frozen in her hiding place, mind reeling. Leif had just saved her, had deliberately misdirected the search, sent them away from her hiding spot, which meant he hadn't betrayed her, meant he was still helping her, even now, even at tremendous personal risk. Hours passed. Astrid stayed hidden, listening to the sounds of the search continuing outside. Eventually Bjorn's voice rose in fury, demanding the monks confess where they'd hidden her. Marcus's calm responses, insisting they harbored no one, that God would judge them if they lied. More threats. The sound of something breaking. A cry of pain that might have been Brother Thomas. Then finally, after what felt like years compressed into a single afternoon, the sound of horses departing, fading gradually until only silence remained, broken by the monks' quiet voices discussing damage, tending injuries. Astrid didn't move, couldn't trust that they were truly gone, that this wasn't some trick to make her reveal herself. She stayed wedged in her hiding place until full darkness fell, until Marcus himself came to the chapel and called her name softly. "They're gone, child. You can come out now. You're safe." Safe. Such a relative term. Astrid unfolded herself from the cramped space, her legs numb from hours of stillness, her whole body shaking with residual terror. Marcus helped her stand, his face showing new bruises that made guilt crash over her in waves. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry they hurt you because of me. Do not apologize for the violence of others." Marcus's voice was firm despite his obvious pain. "You did not strike these blows. You merely existed, and cruel men decided that was offense enough. The sin is theirs, not yours." They moved back to the main building where other monks were cleaning up the destruction left by the search. Overturned furniture, smashed pottery, torn blankets. The warriors had been thorough in their rage. Brother Thomas sat by the fire with a cloth pressed to his bleeding nose, his young face showing shock that anyone would violate a holy place so casually. "There was a young man with them," Marcus said carefully. "Norse, but different from the others. He seemed to be directing them away from certain areas. Was he perhaps your friend? The one who helped you escape?" Astrid nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Leif had come with the search party to protect her from within it, to misdirect and mislead and buy her continued safety at the cost of his own position. The sacrifice of it, the courage required to stand among those men and actively work against them, made her chest ache with emotions too complex to name. "He loves you very much," Marcus observed quietly, "to risk so much for you." "Yes," Astrid managed, "he does." "Then you must honor that love by surviving. By building the life he sacrificed his safety to give you." Marcus moved to the table where a rough map lay spread out. "Brother Thomas and I have been discussing your next steps. There is a Christian settlement 5 days' journey south. Good people who will help you establish yourself. You could learn a trade, earn wages, perhaps even save enough to travel further if you wished. A real life, child. Not hiding, but living. A real life." The concept felt impossibly distant, like something that happened to other people, not former thralls with iron collars and too much trauma to ever fully heal. But Astrid had learned over the past days that survival meant moving forward even when you couldn't see the path clearly, meant choosing possibility over certainty, hope over resignation. "I'll go," she said. "Tomorrow. I've brought you enough trouble already. You have brought us purpose," Marcus corrected gently. "Reminded us why we chose this life, why we maintain this sanctuary. You are not trouble, Astrid. You are proof that faith, even our strange Christian faith, can create space for mercy in a merciless world." That night, Astrid lay awake on her simple cot, staring at the ceiling beams and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 7 years of slavery, a forced marriage to her family's killer, an impossible escape made possible by a man who'd loved her enough to sacrifice everything, monks who'd sheltered her despite the danger, and now the prospect of an actual future stretching ahead instead of just surviving day to day. Her fingers touched the iron collar still locked around her throat. Someday, she'd have it removed, when she felt truly free, truly safe, truly her own person again. But for now, it stayed, a reminder of where she'd been, what she'd survived, how far she still had to go. Outside, wolves howled in the distance. Inside, Astrid finally let herself believe that morning would come, and with it, another chance to choose life over surrender. That had to be enough. For now, it was more than enough. Astrid's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Freedom isn't something given. It's something taken, often at impossible cost. She could have accepted her fate, married her brother's killer, survived by surrendering piece by piece until nothing remained. Instead, she chose the harder path, the uncertain one, the one that required trusting a stranger's kindness in a world that had shown her only cruelty. What would you have done? Would you have run into that dark forest, not knowing if you'd survive the night? Would you have believed Leif when he said he'd help, or would fear have kept you chained even after the door opened? Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept help when we've been taught we don't deserve it. Sometimes survival means carrying our scars, our iron collars, our painful reminders, until we've truly earned the right to set them down. Astrid's freedom wasn't clean or complete. It was messy, dangerous, and haunted by everything she'd lost. But it was hers, and that made all the difference. If this story moved you, if Astrid's courage reminded you that even in our darkest moments we still have choices, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they know. Subscribe to stay connected with more stories that celebrate the resilience of the human spirit. And remember, you are never just surviving. You are fighting. You are choosing. You are writing your own story, one brave decision at a time.